Okay, so we're at the Reading League in Syracuse, sunny Syracuse, New York, at the 7th Annual Reading League, and I'm Harvey Hubbell, and this is Show and Tell. And who are you, and what do you do?
Hi, Harvey. I am Jessica Sliwerski. I'm CEO and co-founder of Ignite Reading.
Nice. So we just kind of met, but we've been hanging out a little bit now, and I love that. I appreciate
Me
that.
too.
And you're a hero. You're a warrior because tell me about Ignite Reading.
So first, I'm really excited to be here. I'm geeking out because I just recently watched your film and I fell in love with it. It really spoke to my elephant and what I care so passionately about, which is ensuring that every single student, regardless of their zip code, has the right to learn to read. And the work that I lead is a company called Ignite Reading that is focused upon training up a core of highly skilled reading instructors who meet virtually one-on-one with kids during the school day to teach them to read. So over the course of a week, kids in the Ignite Reading program are getting 75 minutes of targeted one-to-one structured literacy instruction.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
How many teachers do you have?
So we have in our program right now close to 1,000 tutors, and we are serving just over 7,000 kids as of today, with a lot more kids coming this fall, and ultimately a vision of teaching 1 million kids at least to read. And we are specifically focused from a vision standpoint upon first graders, because that is when kids are supposed to learn to read, which you so beautifully highlighted in your film. But the severity of the crisis in our country is such that we are teaching kids all the way up through 8th grade right now who still have decoding gaps and need that targeted support.
Well, I was just talking to our mutual friend Kareem Weaver.
Yeah.
And so there's kind of like a time and place for everything. Like a kindergarten, first grade, you're supposed to get the foundation laid, and there's going to be, if you're in 8th grade and you're not reading, you got the self-esteem issues, you have all kinds of stuff. You're angry. You have a right to be angry. So let's talk about this range of kids that you deal with, and let's talk about how you're planning on fixing that.
So, yes, definitely, if you are in middle school and you still have not learned to read, there is learning trauma that is at that point connected to it. And in my experience, I've seen that also as young as 3rd graders. And kids who, by the time they're in 3rd grade, are old enough to recognize that they don't know how to read. They can't access what's being taught in the classroom the way that their peers who do know how to read can. And they've internalized that they're dumb and they can't and something is wrong with them. And the reality is that if you're in 3rd grade and you still don't know how to read, that's not because something is wrong with you as, a precious, innocent child. It's because for one reason or another, the system has failed you and you have not gotten what you needed in order to ensure that you learn to read. This is a very addressable crisis, which is what makes me so angry, is that we don't have to have this problem. We know exactly what to do in order to ensure all kids learn to read. And so what I'm doing with Ignite Reading is recognizing, because I come into this work as an educator. I began my career 20 years ago as a classroom teacher. I did not learn how to teach my students to read until my 3rd year of teaching. So my first 2 years, I was a 5th grade teacher in the Bronx. I had many kids in my classroom who still did not learn how to read. I had no idea how to teach them, which when you're a teacher and you go into this profession because you want to serve children, and you can't even do the most basic thing, which is teach them to read, it is gutting. And I think a lot of teachers leave the profession because of this. And I was fortunate enough that in my 3rd year of teaching, I went to a different school in Harlem. I taught 1st grade, and I just so happened to be given an evidence-based curriculum and professional learning, and my first graders learned to read. And I thought to myself, yes, this is a science, and it is not rocket science. If I could do it by being empowered with an evidence-based curriculum, then arguably anybody could. And that was what first lit the spark for me around this desire to want to figure out how to teach as many kids as possible to read. So fast forward over the course of my career, I was an assistant principal. I was a K-12 instructional coach. I coached principals around New York City in best practices in literacy instruction. I co-founded my first ed tech company about 10 years ago with a literacy app I designed that was focused more on the comprehension elements of the science of reading. Before then, leading a national nonprofit called Open Up Resources that publishes high-quality core curricula and makes them openly accessible to teachers. And one of those programs is a book by researchers Dr. Sharon Walpole and Dr. Michael McKenna called How to Plan Differentiated Reading Instruction. And I fell in love with this book because it so beautifully lays out for teachers how to teach kids to read in a way that in my experience was the easiest and fastest and got results for kids right out of the gate. And kids can't wait, right? We have no time in terms of every precious moment for them. And so I was exploring this curriculum and I was again reminded, we have this crisis, not a lot had changed since I had been in the classroom. Meanwhile, I was a mom of a 4-year-old at that time. I was coaching a teacher in East Oakland, and I was having all of these ideas about how all of this time had passed and yet nothing had really changed since when I was in the classroom. And yet I was at a point in my career where I was like, I know what to do about this. I know not only how to teach kids to read and how to teach teachers to read, but I know how to build companies and scale companies in education. And I know all of these different layers of the system and what it could mean to innovate in a way that could bring a high quality instructor to every child. And that was the beginning of building Ignite Reading during the pandemic. And now we are working with schools all across the country to teach kids to read.
Well, when you're talking about precious time, and when I was a kid, and this is still going on in some places, and the numbers I'm hearing of who works with the science of reading, it could be 70% of the population, educators don't. But there's a science here behind it. So when I was like a kid, going back to 1964, the teachers would say, oh, he's going to get it next year, or he'll come on and he'll get it the second year, or he'll get it by third grade, it'll kick in. But now, see, you can't be 2 grades behind in first grade. You can be in third grade, because there's a step of what you have to know, where you have to be. So that kind of, you mentioned earlier, that kind of damage is hurting your self-esteem, because these guys are good readers over here in this side of the class. These guys are the bad readers on this side of the class. You're already marked and you're already labeled. Mm-hmm. And you move on to the next, you get socially promoted because your teacher doesn't want to deal with you again. And you go to the third grade. The kids will tell the teacher, oh he can't read, he's dumb, he's this or that. They're already being labeled. So that hurt and all that stuff comes in. So if we know better, we do better. Mm-hmm. So we have all this information. How do we get this information out to more people?
Great question. So in first grade, depending upon what time of year it is in first grade, you could be 2 grades behind. And what I find so magical about first grade is that there is an opportunity as educators, beginning at the beginning of first grade, to not only close the kindergarten gaps that kids may still have if they haven't yet mastered basic alphabet knowledge, letter names, letter sounds, and then also cover all of that foundational first grade content that they need in terms of cracking the code, but then of course the upper strands of Scarborough's reading rope and giving them lots of rich language development. And we all have to be really urgent about that, and we have to be maniacally focused on it, which again, something I appreciated about your film so much is the way that you spotlighted the urgent intentionality of a school district that is serving kids who our country in many ways has blamed for this reading crisis. We've said, oh, the problem is the kids. The problem is poverty. The problem is that they're multilingual learners. The problem is their parents, right? All of these tropes that we have around why kids don't learn to read, but what it really actually comes down to is equitable access to learning to read and kids being given a high-quality instructor implementing an evidence-based program. And you showed that in your film. And then you also showed the ways that that has to be wrapped around with an intentional approach to benchmark assessments and progress monitoring and constantly ensuring kids are getting exactly what they need. And when kids aren't getting those things, and sadly in our country, too many of our kids are not getting that, then yes, it leads to them not learning to read on time, and that compounds over the years, and that creates that trauma. And the thing about learning to read by the end of first grade is that starting in second grade is when kids are supposed to be reading and reading and reading and strengthening their reading muscles, becoming more fluent, and building knowledge. Because once you learn to crack the code, right? Frederick Douglass talks about once you learn to read, you are forever free. And that is true. When a child learns to read, a world of knowledge is opened up to them that they can self-serve. And as they're reading and they're becoming stronger, more fluent readers, they are also scooping up vocabulary. They are scooping up background knowledge. And all of that is what feeds into them being able to comprehend. And so there is this thing we talk about in education, this notion that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Because the earlier you unlock the code, the sooner you are off to the races building knowledge. And that knowledge building is what's going to enable you to be increasingly successful throughout your school trajectory. And the kids who don't learn to crack the code are at a disadvantage because now they're becoming knowledge poor. And so not only are they behind when it comes to decoding, but they're behind when it comes to building knowledge. And that negatively impacts their school opportunities. It feeds into the trauma, and it impacts their life trajectories as well. And so with a program like Ignite Reading, we are recognizing, yes, you need to be taught precisely what your skill gaps are so that you are empowered to unlock the code and learn to read. And you need a loving, caring, nurturing coach to support you through this process and to foster that growth mindset and to cheer you on when this is hard. Because learning to read, it is hard, right? It is hard when you're a little kid, and it's harder when you're an older kid. And what we see in our program is that the kids come in, and in the safety of this one-on-one relationship with a real human who is building a caring relationship with them, who is teaching them to read, the kids are pushing themselves in a way that in a classroom setting, in a small group, assuming they even attend a school that's doing targeted small groups, they're not necessarily going to push themselves in the same way, especially if, learning to read is a struggle for them, or they've got a lot of trauma around big feelings related to learning to read.
Well, you said as the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, that on the child, so, you're like, I can't do, my little brother does this and I can't do this. I'm a loser. So you're beginning to send these messages to yourself. So that self-defeating comes up over and over again. So you and I are like word nerds. We like, these things, right? I mean, that's the thing. I talk to a lot of people like that. So, I mean, I was a kid that almost didn't learn how to read. Mm-hmm. And And they wrote down, yeah, he's dyslexic, but that they didn't do anything about it.
Yeah.
They put me ADHD or something like that, but they put me in the back of the classroom, or I chose to go to the back of the classroom where I can look out the window and stuff. Meanwhile, the kid who can read, once you're cracking the code,
Right.
you're like, all of a sudden, now the new signals are going into the brain. I can
That's
do
right.
this.
That's right.
Cat.
Yeah.
Cat.
Yeah.
And now it's like, wow, look at me, I can do that. Then I can read that.
Yep.
And everybody loves Cat in the Hat. That's a great book anyhow. But when you're a kid and you're beginning to master it, now you're conquering stuff.
Yeah.
So and you can see that in these kids, and instead of blaming the kid, and instead of saying he's going to catch on, or he's lazy, or he's this, or
Yeah.
he's that, there's a science to reading, and we can make a difference on that.
So I completely agree with you. What I know from my career as an educator is that as kids are gaining competencies and seeing that they can do hard things, they become more motivated to gain more competencies and do more hard things. And we often hear from educators whose kids are in our program, they're like, yes, the data is amazing and you're teaching them to read and we're so excited. But what we're really excited about is that they are confident now. And these are kids who before they weren't raising their hands in class or their heads were down during reading. And now they're so excited to raise their hand and even just ask for help and advocate for help when they're getting stuck. And in some cases, because of the nature of one-to-one, we can start to accelerate them forward even after closing their gaps. And then they become leaders in their classroom. So when the teacher's doing the whole class phonics lesson about our controlled vowels, if in their one-on-one instruction, they've now made it to that, they're ready to help teach their classmates, which, wow, what an incredible feeling, right? To conquer something that is hard for you and then feel like, if I did that, I can do anything. And to instill that resilience in a young child, that's powerful. That can fuel so much about their educational experience. But I'm also thinking about this question you had asked about knowing better and doing better. And, in your film, and even just now as you were talking, you were alluding a little bit to the research around like brains are different. And I talk a lot to parents. I only have one child, but I have friends who have multiple kids, and they will talk about how for one of their kids, learning to read was so easy. It was effortless. And for their other child, they needed structured literacy. They needed direct instruction and lots of repetition. And then for one of their other kids, that child was dyslexic. And that child needed not just structured literacy, not just repetition, but hundreds of thousands of at-bats before that orthographic mapping was solidified. And so these precious children that we have the privilege of serving as educators, they all come in with different, beautiful brains. And so when we teach...
That's why it's called a learning difference, not a learning disability. When I was a kid, it was a learning disability.
Yeah.
Now, I want to, you as an educator, you're in a classroom, you're looking at the kid, you're already telling us, social cues, that the head down, not raising their hand, and then you're like, hey, they're raising their hand, they're doing this and that, they're beginning to get it. So, but you have this company, let's pretend that there's been a pandemic and we live in the year 20,000 something or other, I don't know, or where we are even, but you have this company where you're not there, but you're there.
Right.
You've got this virtual thing going on. So you're watching the kids, so you're watching these signals, but you also test these kids.
Right.
Because I want to know, does he know it, or is he just had sugar cereal this morning? That's why he's raising his hand. Mm-hmm. But does he know these things? So talk to me about the testing, and how do you know that you're succeeding with these kids?
Yeah, great question. And I'm also going to connect that back to the school ecosystem and how it helps all of us know better and do better. Because when we're working with a school, we think of ourselves as partners. We embed as part of their literacy ecosystem. We are not trying to do something siloed, something completely different, right? We are asking teachers to share their kids with us for 15 minutes a day. And we feel that promises to kids are sacred and promises to teachers are sacred. I was a classroom teacher. The thought of giving up my kids for 15 minutes a day to somebody to do something with them would have given me agita. And so I would need to know that whatever they're doing with my kids is high quality and excellent. And so with that in mind, when we embed as part of a school what it looks like, and then I'll get into the mechanics, is during your daily literacy block, you have whole class instruction, and then you move into some component of independent reading. It might be 15 minutes, might be 20, sometimes it's 30 minutes. Well, as you can imagine, independent reading can either be the most beautiful, magical part of a day when all kids are productively engaged in a text and actually reading it, or independent reading can be a hot mess where everything goes off the rails in a way that the rest of the day is ruined for the teacher because you are asking kids who are non-readers to do something that they can't do. And that can breed frustration. It can even breed anger. And then kids will opt out accordingly. And so recognizing that this structure exists as part of a literacy block, we embed, and the kids who are still learning to crack the code will open their device, put on their headphones, click a button, and boom, their Ignite tutor shows up on the screen. And it is the same person every day. So they are building a very strong bond with this highly trained instructor. At the beginning of the program, the tutor is going to do baseline diagnostics to understand precisely where on the continuum of learning to read the child is falling. So for you, maybe that looks like blends and digraphs. For this student, maybe it looks like they still need to learn the letter names. And for this student, they're working on vowel teams, and this student's working on R-controlled vowels. And kids will fall at all different places on the continuum.
Because they have different brains.
Well, because they have different gaps.
They have different experiences. They have different vocabulary. So they have
They're
different.
all
they have
coming
different
in
gaps.
at different spots.
So yeah. So
that's right.
Right. That's the differences, and that's a uniquely wonderful thing. The neurodiversity, the cerebral diversity of our community should be celebrated.
It is.
So
and
keep telling me, because I'm picking up what you're putting down, and I'm loving what you're saying.
Yeah. So here's the thing. In a typical classroom, as early as kindergarten, kids are coming in with foundational reading skills gaps. Some kids got to go to preschool and learn the alphabet. Other kids did not. So when you come into kindergarten, you already have a lot of discrepancy in terms of where kids are on that continuum. They may or may not all get what they need in kindergarten. Then they're coming into first grade, and we continue to see these gaps. Now you layer on a pandemic, and kids have even greater gaps. But the reality is that education is supposed to be the great equalizer. And so really, no matter where a child comes into us, no matter what the grade level is, and especially nowadays given technology and everything we know about the science of reading, we should be able to meet them where they are. Now, can a classroom teacher all on their own differentiate to every single student and meet them where they are? No, that is impossible. I was a really, really good teacher. I ran my tier 1 instruction like a beast. I did my tier 2 instruction, got all my groups, had all of my data, did all of my progress monitoring, and I still had kids slipping through the cracks because their brains were different and they needed more, right? They needed an extra scoop. So we think about the kids in the film. There is excellent tier 1 instruction happening, like dreamy foundational skills instruction happening in those first grade classrooms. And then you have the small groups, and then you have the kids also getting tier 3. And even then they get to 73%, I think it was, proficiency by the end of the year, because some kids still, on top of all of that, need more. And that is where Ignite Reading comes in. Those kids who still need more, because their brains, right, are different and they need that much more repetition and coaching and support, we're meeting with them and giving them that additional scoop in a one-on-one setting. And it starts with that baseline diagnostic, because we are not going to waste your time teaching you skills that you already know. We're going to teach you exactly where your gaps are. Every 14 lessons, we're going to progress monitor you and understand whether or not you can move on to the next bucket of skills. But even between that 14 lesson progress monitoring cycle, all day, every day, our instructors are trained to collect data in real time. So the power of one-on-one is I can hear every little thing you are doing. In a small group, if I'm asking kids to pronounce phonemes, I might catch that one student mispronounced, but I might not catch another student who's soft-spoken.
Right.
But in one-on-one, you can't opt out, you can't hide. The tutor hears everything, notices everything, addresses everything. So if I'm teaching you short E and short I, and you're flipping those phonemes, I can catch it in real time, I can address it, and I'm also noting and tracking in our platform behind the scenes that you're getting stuck there, and we need to further spiral that, drill down deeper, and keep practicing it. And so that's a level of precision that is also necessary, I believe, if we're going to have a safety net for all kids, and unapologetically ensure that once and for all we solve this crisis, and that 100% of our kids in our nation learn to read, and ideally learn to read before the end of first grade. Like, imagine what that would mean for us.
No, I love it, but we have a lot of people to educate on that. I mean, we got Big Daddy over here has an 11-week-old baby. You can be sure that baby is being read to in the womb, right? Read to in the womb. You guys are reading books now, and they're going to know their letters. Going to know their letters. This kid is going to know in kindergarten the A's,
Right.
the B's, and the C's, and going to be ready for a first grade teacher to work. So that's the first kind of gap that goes in there. The fact that our teachers, a large percentage of them, haven't been told. Empathetic people want to become educators.
Right.
People who care, want to make a difference.
That's right.
And any nation's greatest resource is their youth. Mm-hmm. So these people should be our heroes. We should have
Yes, they are
parades.
heroes.
We should have Secretary parades for.
And we should pay them better,
We
too.
should pay them better. We should pay them as much as a basketball player.
Yeah.
We should pay them a lot, because these people build our nation and our foundation. So when I first met you, when you were in right to read.
Yes.
You tutored the teacher. You taught the teacher.
I did.
So you're teaching the teacher. And are you? I know this. You're a reading facilitator or a reading specialist at that time?
So at that time, I was running Open Up Resources, and so I'll give you a little bit of I'll spill the tea on the Right to Read film.
Spill the tea on the Right to Read. This is
So-
behind the scenes stuff, guys.
So I was running Open Up Resources. I was obsessed with this Walpole and McKenna curriculum. I had asked Dr. Sharon Walpole, who's actually here at this conference, I said, hey, could you teach me to do differentiated instruction so that I can teach my daughter to read, because she's attending a public school here in Oakland, and I'm watching what's happening, and I am losing my mind because I know she is not going to learn to read. At the time, they were using Lucy Calkins. And I'm also worried about all the kids in her class, and her teacher is open to me helping other kids learn to read. And so Sharon said, yeah, sure, I'll teach you over Zoom. And so over a handful of Zoom sessions, Sharon taught me to teach her curriculum. Now, granted, I came in with lots of schema because 15 years before I had used the Success for All curriculum and taught my first graders to read, but I was rusty. And so Sharon teaches me, and I am just like on fire as she's teaching me, because I am again being reminded that this is not hard to do. And I again am seeing right at that point, Emily Hanford had recently written her first piece, and we're all starting to talk about the crisis again. And I'm just like, it's been 15 years since I was in the classroom, and literally nothing has changed. Like, what the hell, right? And so I start working with kids at my daughter's school, and very quickly got on the radar of the principal, who said, "You cannot do this." And I said, "Why not?" And she said, "Because this is not the district adopted curriculum. If you want to volunteer here, if you want to help teach kids to read, you have to do guided reading." And I said, "Well, guided reading is ineffective. It has been proven to be ineffective. It does not teach kids to read. Your data indicates that kids at your school are not learning to read. So you're telling me that even though I know how to teach kids to read, you do not want me to help teach kids to read. And even though the teachers here want my help, you do not want my help." And she said, "You cannot volunteer unless you do guided reading." And I said, "I will not do guided reading," and therefore I got kicked out of volunteering at my daughter's school. So I reach out to the office.
You're a badass.
I'm a little bit of a rebel rouser. And I also, sidebar, and then I'll come back to how I got connected with Sabrina Causey from the Right to Read film. Sidebar, I am a cancer survivor. I was diagnosed with breast cancer right after my daughter was born, went through treatment, and I was already, prior to that experience, very, very passionate about literacy, about education reform, about equity in education. And I emerged from this crucible in my life even more passionate and more bold, insofar as I felt that much more convinced that my purpose on this planet is not just to be the best mom I can be to the tiny human I am raising, but also to help as many kids as possible learn to read. And that is the piece of the puzzle I can control in an effort to make our world a better place. And having had the experience of going through cancer, and I had a double mastectomy, reconstruction, 3 months of chemotherapy, and to survive an experience like that puts a lot in perspective. And my perspective was, if I can survive cancer, I can do anything. And it made me more brave, and it made me not afraid to put myself out there and to stand up for children and to advocate for others, because the worst thing that could possibly happen would be that people don't like what they say and therefore they don't like me. Okay. Or maybe I might lose my job, and if I lost my job, I know that I'm highly employable and resourceful, and I would find a new job. And so I was not afraid to say, as an educator running a national nonprofit, to my daughter's school and thus that school district, this is not okay. And I was then placed by the volunteer office at the lowest performing school in all of Oakland, where they had 2% literacy proficiency. So basically it was like, okay, she's not going to shut up. She's going to keep causing trouble. Let's put her there. Let's see what she can do there at that school.
You're a volunteer.
I'm a volunteer. So I
You're a volunteer.
cleared my schedule in the afternoons.
And you care about literacy.
Yeah.
And they give you, so 90, just because I have a second grade math average, so
Yeah.
98% of the kids aren't reading
Yes.
at level. 2% are.
That's right.
Okay.
At this particular school,
and
the lowest performing in the district.
And you volunteered to go there.
Yeah, and they said, well, if you want to volunteer, here's a place that'll take your help. And I'm running this nonprofit. I'm the boss. I'm the boss, right? And so I'm like, I can rearrange my schedule. I will clear my afternoons. I will go to this first grade classroom every day, assuming this teacher wants my help. And then I'll, catch up on my work at night after my daughter goes to bed. And meanwhile, my leadership team at work is like, they love this idea, because when I'm bored, I drive everybody crazy. And we were at that point, the company was scaling, and I needed something to fuel me. I felt like this is a crisis. I can help. I know how to teach kids to read. So it felt sinful to not leverage this superpower that I had to help more kids in my community. And I think I also, deep down, the entrepreneur in me, who always gains inspiration from being in the classroom, was at a place where it was like, I am so fucking tired of this problem, and I want to find a way to fix it. And so I am going to roll up my sleeves. I'm going to get in the trenches. I'm going to help teach kids to read. And maybe in doing this, I'll also figure out a way to help address this problem that shouldn't even be a problem, right? So I show up at this classroom. I meet Sabrina Causey. I said, hey, I know how to teach kids to read. Are you okay if I start assessing your kids and figure out what their gaps are? And she's like, lady, I have no idea who you are. I am so happy someone is here to help me. Have at it. So I start baselining her kids. Over the course of the week, we learn that her first graders in the middle of first grade are largely all at beginning or middle of kindergarten levels. So we group them. I tell her I'm going to come back beginning the first week of January. I'm going to start pulling groups each day, and I'm going to teach differentiated instruction, and they are all going to be getting exactly what they need. And while I am doing this, your job is to get some classroom management in place, because I cannot teach your kids if there is pandemonium in the background. Do you want my help with classroom management? And she's like, yes, I would love that. And so over the holiday break, we worked on, what the expectations would be, what the systems would be, what the routines would be, what the rewards and consequences would be, right? She didn't even have classroom management support. And I knew that on a parallel path, we had to put that in place. Also, her classroom library was grubby and dismal and not at all attractive and like enticing. And if you're teaching kids to read, you also want them to be drawn to beautiful books. And so I said, can I build you a classroom library? And at this point, she's like, you can do whatever you want. I'm still just getting to know you. I have no idea how the universe dropped you in my lap, but yes. And so we also built this gorgeous classroom library with tons of books. This is one of my hobbies. I like doing classroom libraries, and comfy seating and lighting and pictures of the kids holding books. And it was just this really sacred space in the classroom, which then also fostered the motivation for kids wanting to learn to read. So I start pulling these groups with her. We start teaching the kids to read. Her classroom management is so much stronger. This whole culture of learning is shifting in her classroom. And she was like, I have to learn how to do this too. And I was like, awesome. So then I start teaching her. And then between the two of us, we're pulling even more groups, and all of the kids are getting exactly what they need. And there were these magical moments where, kids who knew letter names and knew letter sounds, but did not know how to put them together to read the most simple word like bat, would have that moment of unlocking the code and reading their first word. And we would call across the room to each other. I remember I'd be like, Miss Causey, we have a reader. And it would be this big celebratory moment. And imagine what that feels like.
Sure, that goes back to what we were talking about with
right?
the kids. But these kids have never had a victory.
That's right.
They've never had a victory, and you're
right.
giving them their victory.
Right.
And they realize they did it. And they're breaking the code.
Yes. So we start getting these results, right? And her kids are on this trajectory to end the school year reading on grade level, which in the history of this school, when you have 2% literacy proficiency, that's obviously not happening. And we were so pumped about this. This is what got the attention of Kareem Weaver. A parent of a student in Sabrina's class went to an NAACP meeting and said, my baby is learning how to read. And Kareem was like, what is going on? And so he came and met me, met Miss Causey. And then the pandemic happens. And I was in the classroom the Friday when we were packing their bags and loading them up with books and materials, and we were like, we'll see you in 3 weeks. And they never came back. And I have a bit of an obsessive personality, and I could not stop thinking about her kids, who at that point I felt like they were my kids too. And how they could have ended the year on level. They were not. And what that meant. And meanwhile, I'm watching everything shift to Zoom. I'm watching my own child, quote unquote, learn on Zoom. I'm watching Miss Causey try and figure out what to teach on Zoom. And she said at the beginning of fall of 2020, she was like, hey, my school leader said we can do whatever we want. And I was like, you're not going to do whatever you want. We are going to figure out how to do what we were doing together on Zoom. I think there's a way to do this. And so we adapted this curriculum, the skills component and the overarching core curriculum called Bookworms that she was using, so that she could teach it on Zoom. And within the first month of her teaching this way, her data showed her kids were learning to read. And that was when I was like, there is a model here. Like all these pieces came together. It was like, because Sharon Walpole taught me over Zoom, I was like, I can do this at scale and teach non-educators how to teach kids to read. And I can do it over Zoom. And then we can embed as part of a school day, and they can meet one-on-one with kids, and they can teach kids. And I think this will all work. And so I got to work figuring out my first pilot, which was super successful in terms of the data. We saw that kids were learning to read 2.4 times faster than what we'd been doing even in Sabrina Causey's classroom. And that's because it's one-on-one, so it's further accelerated. And then got to work figuring out how to bring it to as many kids as possible. And when we think about knowing better and doing better, I think the biggest chasm here is that if you are an educator and for years you have been told to teach one way, even if in your gut that didn't feel right, but you were told to do that, and then suddenly everyone's saying, oh, no, that was wrong, that was harmful. What you are supposed to do is the science of reading. It can be hard to trust that that's the thing to do, even though it's science, right? Because for years you were told to do this other thing. And so when I think about the change management component of this, to know better and do better, you also have to see and experience the power of teaching this way. And so with a program like Ignite Reading, the way that we're embedding is recognizing that while teachers are experiencing the change management and they are being taught the science of reading, they are, learning a new program to implement, which can be really hard on top of all of the other demands of being a teacher. Their kids are logging into Ignite Reading, and teachers are seeing over their shoulders what's happening in these one-on-one sessions. And they're seeing that each child is getting something different based on the part of the code they're working on. They're seeing that their kids are productively engaged, that they're having fun. So all of this phonics is boring. No, phonics is not boring. Little kids love phonics. Phonics feels really good. Now, if you teach it in a boring way, sure, it's boring. But our tutors are super engaging, and the kids love it. And then they leave their session, and they're bringing all of this good juju back into Tier 2 and Tier 1. And so teachers are like, oh my gosh, there is something to this. My kids are learning to read really quickly, and they love it. And it's feeding into how they access Tier 1. So
Well, that goes,
I want to be part of this science of reading
well,
thing.
that goes back to the science of reading, goes back to you figuring out. Is it? Do you want to call your people and see if you can be a little late? Or
No,
you
I'm
wanna-
good. She knows I'll be a little late.
10 minutes here. Yeah, so you can wrap.
We have 10 minutes to go? Okay. So you were talking about kids who are giving a teacher signals like, my head's down, I'm not participating, I'm not raising my hands. Teachers see and read, I'm paying attention,
Yeah.
I'm looking at you, I'm raising my hand. So that's also an indicator in the science of reading. If I try something, I'm gonna try this program, I'm gonna try this program, I'm gonna do this. I've been through the pendulum 100 times, but the science of reading is wait, we have results for you. You can track your results. You were doing it before, you were tracking results, and you had failures. Here you have success. I mean, that's really what it's all about. If you have success, if you know better, you do better.
Mm-hmm.
If you see it and it's successful, I mean, that's what's the difference between the science of reading and some other curriculum. Somebody's going to just tell you, yeah, we're buying this now. We're going to buy this right now.
Yeah.
Because if your kids are doing better, if the test scores are going up, they know what you're talking about, and they're learning it. That's successful. Am I correct? I mean, I just want to make sure. The reality check for me.
Yeah, I think that what's hard is that if you've never seen it before, how can you trust it, right? And so, Sabrina Causey is a really good example where she was told she needed to implement Lucy Calkins. She was doing that in her first grade classroom. She was not getting results, obviously. Her kids were not learning to read. And she was so desperate that she trusted me, a complete stranger, who showed up and said, I can teach your kids to read. And she said yes, because her mentality at that time was like, if this woman can just get a couple of kids off my hands so I can better control my classroom, great.
Excuse me.
But what Bree then saw through the way that I was teaching was that her kids were learning to read. And that was the aha moment for her, where she was like, whatever you're doing, I want in. Because teachers want to be able to actually teach their kids. And so with Calkins, even I was teaching that way at one point, and it was not working. But if you don't know what else works, and you can hear all about science of reading, but if you're not actually seeing concretely what that looks like, then it's hard to be bought in, right? It's hard to trust that that's going to work for your kids. And so with a program like Ignite Reading, you can have a district that's adopting a new evidence-based program and putting their teachers through training. But you also need an example of what it really looks like to do this well and for your kids to have this experience if we want to truly change hearts and minds here and make this sustainable. And so that's where I also look at, the Hopeville film as what a powerful, concrete example of what it means to do this work well. And so you're honing in on what they are doing for their core foundational skills instruction, which the science of reading we can get really focused on the phonics piece, but the science of reading is all of the strands of Scarborough's reading rope, or all of the pillars, right? And a high quality core curriculum is going to not only give kids evidence-based foundational skills instruction in early literacy, but also be tackling fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, language development, right? And what you show in Hopeville is when it comes to teaching kids to decode, which is the ticket to the game, they cannot do any of this other stuff if they do not learn to decode. Here is a roadmap for how to do that well. You adopt a high quality curriculum, you train your teachers in it, you hold them accountable to implementing it with fidelity, you do benchmarking assessments with a valid tool so you understand where kids are starting. You progress monitor them to see who's making progress and gaining these skills, who is not. When they are not, you put them in groups. You give them more of what they need. You keep using the data to inform whether or not it's working. For the kids that it's working for, great. They may move back into tier 1. For the kids who need more, they may move into tier 3. They may need an intervention like Ignite. But like, that is how it is done. But not everybody can understand that because not everybody can see that. And so a big part of knowing better and doing better is having as many powerful proof points of what works and the data that proves that it works.
I couldn't have said it better myself. That was. So I mean, so if our film goes around and people can see it, they invest 80 minutes of their life, and they sit their fannies in a seat and watch it, and and then that's why we like having group discussions. That's why we want to have panel discussions. We want to have teachers, educators, policymakers all in the room together to talk about it. That's why having Right to Read come in, and then having Hopeville or even Truth About Reading. If you're bringing these people together and they're seeing it, and then they're having these discussions that you're talking about. And the other thing that I'm getting here on this hero's journey, because you're a bloody freaking hero.
Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, so what you're doing, and you make lemonade out of your lemons, right? So you're a cancer survivor. You're kicked out of one school and they send you to another school, and it all works out on it because you know what failure could be, and you know what winning is.
And I know what kids deserve. And I am sick and tired of waiting and wishing and hoping that all of the adults in the system get out of their own way to help kids, and have gotten to a place where it's like we all need to roll up our sleeves, and those of us who are willing and able have got to get in there and do everything we possibly can to triage the situation and make sure that all of our babies learn how to read.
Well, you said it. I mean, all of us can do something in it. We can't all do the exact same thing. Everybody's not Jess, but Jess can make you're training gladiators and ninjas out there in this world. Literacy ninjas and gladiators. But
well, like your bucket analogy, right? You talked about drops in a bucket.
That was Dr. Nell, but keep going.
Yeah, okay. So I think about every tutor who comes into our program. It's a paid job. Many of them are college kids or gig economy workers, and they're like, oh, this seems like a cool remote job. But they come in and they go through this intensive certification period where they're having over 100 hours of development in learning how to teach kids to read and an intensive practicum experience. And we are igniting them because anyone who has the experience of teaching a child to read, it is the most emotionally gratifying experience. And so they become ignited. They want to teach more and more and more kids to read. And we are now seeing that many of our tutors are saying, I want to go into education. Because of this experience, I want to be a teacher. And think about what it means to step into the classroom already knowing how to teach kids to read and being really good at it and having thousands of hours of practice successfully teaching kids to read. And so the ripple effect we're also trying to have is not only addressing the crisis head on with kids right now who desperately need this targeted intervention, but also recognizing that we have the power to ignite a future core of educators who are highly trained reading teachers.
Well, and that's what we need. And so the drops in the bucket, we're just one person, but together, if each of us are a drop, we can overflow the bucket. So you're manufacturing not only readers, but you're manufacturing teachers. So at the end of our film, we have a call to action. And everybody's at a different level, just like those babies you're talking about going into kindergarten. Yeah. So we have adults that are also at very different levels, and whether you can volunteer or you can teach or you can do one thing, you can advocate as a parent.
Right.
So we made the advocacy toolkit. So no matter where you are, whatever state you're in, whatever problem you're in, you're going to find a place to get involved, and to be involved in, as Kimyana Burke says, the literacy crisis is the one is one thing that we can fix.
That's right.
It's fixable, and all of us just get in there and get involved in it. So talk to me about the advocacy toolkit and how can we make it better? How would you make it better?
I think that the biggest piece of everything here is that we're finally talking about it, and that, again, with a film like yours, I really can't say this enough, you are so concrete about what to do about it. So we can't keep having excuses of, yeah, we know it's a problem, but, like, there is no but. We know it's a problem, and we are all going to have a fire lit under our asses to help our nation's children, to make sure that they learn how to read. And the first step in that is adopting a high quality evidence-based curriculum and making sure that everyone in the district is on the same page about what it truly means to implement it with fidelity, and then what assessment tools are going to tell us whether or not we're implementing it with fidelity. But like, shit is on fire right now, right? We're already in the start of a school year. We have so many kids right now today who are not getting what they need. And while things are on fire, we need a fire hose to make sure that everyone learns to read this school year if they are sitting in a school. And I look at my program, Ignite Reading, as that fire hose. We will get in, we will start teaching them to read right now. We will be that safety net. But at the same time, there needs to be this fire retardant roof that is built. And that is where the intentionality around the curriculum, the professional learning, the support for teachers, and also, Harvey, we need accountability. Why does nobody lose their job when kids don't learn how to read? And I don't like that teachers often get scapegoated, because in my experience, teachers are doing what they've been told to do. But I see a lot of school leaders and I see a lot of system leaders who are not accountable for really, truly ensuring that the most important thing we do as educators, which is teaching kids to read, is getting done. And so I think that this toolkit that you have and these important conversations that you're creating space for enables all of us to go into it eyes wide open, and nobody can have an excuse right now for not doing exactly what we know works for kids. And if they don't know how to do that, they can watch your film, and right there is the recipe. You lay out all the tools when it comes to that decoding piece and the lower strands of Scarborough's reading rope.
That's great. Towards this conference, our film is playing tonight for the second time ever. And you're going to actually, you saw it in California, now you're going to see it in Syracuse.
I am. I'm so excited.
Which is pretty exciting. And we're at the conference, and one of the things, I mean, everything you just said, that's very nice and is very complimentary. And all these guys worked hard on making that film, and so we appreciate it. But what I really liked when we were sitting there, and you said that we made Emily Hanford swear twice in our film. So if you watch our film, she swears twice in it. Emily Hanford, like the goddess of good, swears twice, because this is a serious issue. This is a really serious issue, and you don't want to piss off Emily Hanford and have her mad at you. So, all right, what else do we need to know that we haven't talked about already today? I love talking with you. You are my hero.
Thank you.
And this is a great hero's journey. You are a superhero. Hold on, I just want to. Oh, she's on fire! Oh, burn, man! All right. So, okay, so what else? What else do we need to know?
Wow. I just think that, I mean, I want everyone to see your film. I want everyone to see the Right to Read film. I think that both of these films really highlight the problem, and we want lots of people talking about the problem. And then I want every educator rolling up their sleeves and getting into classrooms and doing whatever it takes to make sure their kids learn to read. And my company, Ignite Reading, is here to support school districts who need help along that path to ensuring that all kids in their particular school system have the right to learn to read.
But here's this thing, because here we are, like 2023 or something like that. They can virtually contact you.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
schools in South Carolina, South Dakota, South Bronx,
Yeah.
South Los Angeles, they can all just,
Yeah, they can go to our website, ignite-reading.com, and request to have a conversation.
that is awesome. You are a hero, and you're changing the world.
Thank you.
You are changing the world. You're changing so many lives. Thank you.